So, are there demonic influences over governments? Maybe even here in the USA or Canada? Maybe. I got memories praying with others in 1970s for the USA. Again, they weren't the most educated as far as this world goes. They were bold and consistent in prayer, and they recognized that there could be demonic influences influencing many of the decisions and actions by people in government. We prayed against evil, and we realized that praying for our government was also this aspect of spiritual warfare. But this is going to be a shorter version of a longer video which I talk about this prayer. But please click like and subscribe. I'm going to be talking at different times in the future about different aspects of spiritual warfare too as they come up. This is something which I felt strongly enough that I had the longer video on prayer dealing with 1 Timothy 2, 1 through 4, and 9 other aspects of prayer. This is one of them. But also, I wanted to break this content out and do another video with much of the same content, but still with this realization of spiritual warfare, the understanding we need to have that Satan and his servants will try to influence those who are in government. There's nothing that says that a person who has a government position, a place of authority, cannot be deceived and influenced by demonic forces. And deceived people, no matter where you are in the world, may have already infiltrated parts of your government. They may have been driven there by political obsessions. They may have this drive within them to seek that position, to be in that place of influence and decision making, to enforce whatever worldview they have on the people that they can around them under their authority. So they may be driven there by a desire for power. Oh yeah, desire for power and prestige. And they may use their positions as cloaks for personal immorality. They may be slaves themselves to their own addictions, drug use especially, occult bondage even. And one of the things that we've noticed many times over the years is that people who are into the occult, who are into parapsychology as a way which it tries to give it a scientific cloak, they do come out with a hostility to biblical Christianity and to Jesus himself. And I've often wondered whether that could be a source of hostility of governments. That people go there who have been in the occult mysticism, and they have hostility to biblical Christianity, and they bring that out in their position and under their authority. So let's start here. Ephesians chapter 6 verses 10 through 12. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. I encourage you to look over this whole passage. One thing I do want to note here is that the words which are described here, rulers, authorities, cosmic powers over present darkness, spiritual forces, they are used also talking about governments, people in authority. So part of spiritual warfare, I think, means recognizing that people in authority in government may themselves be being influenced by the enemy, by the schemes of the devil, as Paul put in verse 6:11. So, as I pointed out, they may be driven there to seek power, to hold on to power, a desire for power itself, greed, personal immorality, cloak for their immorality, cloak for their addictions, cloak for drug use, cloak for their own occult bondage, and they may have a deep hostility to biblical Christianity because Christ reproves their sins, because Christ can bring them freedom but the dark powers which may hold them in bondage don't want them to find freedom in Christ. It could be that they originally came into this through false teachings, things which felt good, sounded good, but angels of light masquerading as servants of righteousness. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 13 through 15 say, "For such men are false apostles, deceitful workmen, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light." If you run into an angel of light, there's no guarantee that that's from God. It's Satan disguising himself. And Paul goes on to say, "It is no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness, their end will correspond to their deeds." And there's a whole book which I have, right here, The Beautiful Side of Evil, Johanna Michelson. It's not that easy to find anymore. It was a bestseller back in the late 1970s and 1980s, and describes her being caught in evil by seeing the beautiful side, being caught in the new age, clairvoyance, things like that, being freed. And you can find her name and her testimony under that very same name on YouTube itself. So if you want to look further into that. So it may be that people in government have come in and are fascinated by these false teachings. They may be making decisions based on counterfeit spiritual guidance and the occult. We do know that in the USSR, Soviet Union, 1970s, to the 1980s, there were scientists and people trying to do remote viewing, clairvoyance, ESP, occult, mysticism, occult powers, and so on. Hugh Ross, the eminent Christian astronomer, spoke about, he's speaking there, and he saw, when he stood up to speak once, some scientists going into convulsions and other manifestations that were very definite hallmarks of demonic possession. Those had been the people who had been experimenting with parapsychology, ESP, and remote viewing. And the next time he spoke, he had a fellow Christian praying during his presentation, restraining the power of the enemy. In the United States, U.S. Army had Stargate Project, CIA had MK Ultra, and so on. Talk about remote viewing. In the movie Men Who Stare at Goats, in the book also. The book was, I believe, nonfiction. I haven't read it myself. But could the people who have been in these programs be still continuing with those practices and still be in places of influence within our United States government and making decisions based upon guidance they have received in those ways? We do know that in the ancient world, there were people who had demonic influence in positions of authority influencing the rulers there. Prophet Jeremiah warned the rulers who surrounded Jerusalem, the other nations around there, said, "Do not listen to your prophets, your diviners, your dreamers, your fortune tellers, or your sorcerers." Warn them against false prophecy. Isaiah said, Isaiah chapter 8, verse 19, "And when they say to you, inquire of the mediums and the necromancers who chirp and mutter, should not a people inquire of their God? Should they inquire of the dead on behalf of the living?" People going in for clairvoyance, necromancy, speaking to false spirits, counterfeit guidance. Are they in influence in government and making decisions based on that guidance? Are they speaking to the spiritual authorities, the spiritual wickedness in present darkness? Do they have hostility toward biblical Christianity based upon a bondage within their heart to the powers of the enemy? Back in the 1960s, 1970s, McCandless Phillips, who was a strong Christian, Also probably the best New York Times reporter at that time. There may be others who would dispute that, but he had a book, The Bible, Supernatural, and the Jews. It was really a plea to the Jewish people around that he was seeing being caught up in bondage to the occult. And he spoke about aspects in that book what people who are under demonic influence do. People who are occupied by demons are driven and compelled to do things they know they should not do. A while ago, a boy wrote to a minister with this complaint. When I catch something alive, like a fly or a mouse, I pick it apart. I know this is wrong. I don't want to do it, but I can't help it. Can you help me? Yeah. The compulsions, the depravity, the things we see coming up. Is that from God? No. Are they being driven by demons, compelled to do things that they should not do? Phillips again. Another category of demonic activity is driving men. Some men are driven by ambition. They're driven by it so hard they inflict much damage along their upward path upon other people. And when Phillips is using the word men here, he's using it in the style of the time, not to speaking of males, but men and women in the generic sense. Some men are driven by ambition. They're driven by it so hard they inflict much damage along the upward path upon other people. Some men and women are driven to dominate others and, if possible, to hold them in fear. Some men and women are driven to achieve an almost impossible perfection. In the process, others are subjected to gross inconvenience and pain. Driven men and women are often, though not always, miserable, and they have an unusual capacity for inflicting misery upon others. Sounds like demonically influenced narcissism to me. There are a number of categories, the dark triad, which are spoken about by psychology, but do we recognize the people on those paths? There may be a minority, maybe no more than 5%, but the misery that they cause and the ambition that they follow, do we recognize that they could well be under demonic influence in my own life? I find times of spiritual warfare, prayer, fasting, and prayer are times which they lose their influence, where they're shuffled to the side, and where they begin to look at their behavior and other people call them to account in a way which they haven't been before. So, last quote from McCandless Phillips. The instinct for destruction is almost automatic in persons who are demonically influenced. Instinct for destruction. Are there people around us, and we see even in government, who seem to be driven to destruction? Do we take it that they're just wicked people, or is there something beyond their mere evil tendencies and desires that may be driving them? So, people can be driven into politics and do the types of things which we're describing through a political obsession, political ambition. And I think that we need to, first thing to do is always pray. Pray for everyone, as I spoke about in the other video. I'll tell more about that. If I'm speaking to someone who's been through any of these programs in the government, such as Stargate Project, MK Ultra, I don't know how sound the information is about them. The documents are declassified. If you're still, I would say, come to Jesus in saving faith. Get free of those influences. Leave the misery and the evil behind. Come to Jesus. He can save you. He came that we might have life and have it more abundantly. If you're a Christian, if you have come to Christ in saving faith, be rooted and grounded in the Word. Avoid those programs. Maybe you can refuse participation if you've been involved in them in any way, or they've been seeking to involve you in any way upon First Amendment grounds, that those are aspects of pagan religion. Freedom of religion. And if you participated, pray, to renounce before God the devil and all his works. That was a part of conversion and baptism for Christians in the early years. And I think we should still be praying with people as they come to Christ, that they would do that. It might save them some real heartache, some bad influence in their lives until they actually come to knowing that they should do that. So there's some other videos I have about prayer, about getting rid of your demons, about the authority of the believer, and so on. So I'd refer you to those and bring this. Is it possible that there are demonic influences over governments? And I would say yes, if there are people within those governments who have opened their lives to demonic influences. And so Satan will try to influence those who are in governments and positions of authority, and also try to do it to restrain Christianity, to restrain our witness. So if we're to complete our mission to reach the world with the gospel, what needs to be restrained is the powers of the enemy, the demonic influences that would seek to muzzle us. Pray for the powers behind the people who may be showing. Pray against the powers behind the people that may be showing that hostility. Pray for their salvation and recognize that this is entirely possible. So, thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. Hope this can help you to know how to view what's going on and to pray intelligently, consistently, and boldly.